I thought I had finally found my place in their family. After 3 years of marriage to David, his parents had embraced me with open arms. Or so I believed. Margaret would call me daughter with such warmth in her voice, and Robert would pat my shoulder whenever we visited, telling David how lucky he was. I craved that acceptance, that sense of belonging I'd never quite found in my own fractured childhood. Every Sunday dinner felt like a small victory, every shared laugh a confirmation that I was worthy of love. The house always smelled of Margaret's lavender perfume and fresh-baked bread, a combination that made me feel safe in ways I couldn't quite explain. I would watch her hands as she kneaded dough, imagining the grandmother she might become to our future children. Robert would sit in his leather chair, reading glasses perched on his nose, occasionally looking up to smile at me over his newspaper. These moments felt precious, sacred even. I was building something I'd never had before, a real family. But families, I was learning, could be more complicated than the warm embraces and Sunday roasts suggested. There were whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, glances, exchanged between Margaret and Robert that carried weight I couldn't decipher. David would brush off my concerns with a kiss to my forehead, telling me I was overthinking things. "They love you," he'd say, and I wanted so desperately to believe him that I pushed down the small voice in my chest that wondered why love sometimes felt so conditional. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while David was at work. Margaret's voice carried an urgency I'd never heard before, trembling slightly as she spoke. "Sweetheart, we need you to come over right away. There's been a situation with Robert's business, and we need your help with some paperwork. It's quite urgent, dear. Can you come now?" The way she said dear felt different somehow, more calculated than caring, but I dismissed the feeling as paranoia. I drove through the familiar streets with my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Something felt off, but I couldn't name it. Margaret had mentioned lawyers and documents, urgent signatures needed before some deadline I didn't fully understand. My stomach twisted with each turn toward their house, that same lavender and bread, scent now seeming cloying rather than comforting as I walked through their front door. They were waiting for me in the dining room, papers spread across the mahogany table like fallen leaves. Margaret's usual warm smile seemed strained, and Robert avoided my eyes entirely, shuffling through documents with unusual intensity. "Thank goodness you're here, darling," Margaret said, but her voice carried a theatrical quality that made my skin prickle. "We just need you to sign a few things to help us through this difficult time. Family helps family, doesn't it?" The words felt rehearsed, and for the first time in 3 years, I wondered if I was seeing my in-laws clearly. Robert finally looked up, his expression unreadable as he pushed a pen toward me. "Just a formality," he said, but his hands were shaking slightly. I stared down at the papers, the legal language swimming before my eyes like a foreign script I couldn't decode. Something deep in my chest, some primitive instinct honed by years of disappointment, began to scream warnings I couldn't ignore. I set the pen down carefully, my hand trembling. "I think I should have a lawyer look at these first," I said quietly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The drive to the lawyer's office felt like moving through water, everything slow and dreamlike. Margaret had protested, of course, her voice taking on a sharp edge I'd never heard before. "Don't you trust us?" she'd asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke. Robert had grown quiet, almost sullen, muttering about unnecessary complications and family business. But I held firm, surprising myself with my resolve. Attorney Sarah Chen had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her office smelled like coffee and old books instead of lavender and manipulation. She spread the documents across her desk with the careful precision of someone who understood that papers could change lives, could steal futures if not examined properly. I watched her face as she read, noting the way her eyebrows drew together, the small intake of breath that made my heart race. "Mrs. Morrison," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, Do you understand what you were being asked to sign? I shook my head, feeling foolish and naive. The legal language had been deliberately complex, I realized now, designed to confuse rather than clarify. Sarah's explanation came slowly, each word hitting me like a physical blow. They were trying to make me financially responsible for Robert's failing business debts. Tens of thousands of dollars in obligations that would have followed me for years, possibly decades. My home, my future, my children's inheritance, all of it would have been at risk. The papers were crafted to look like routine family financial planning, but they were actually a trap disguised as trust. I sat in that office chair feeling the world shift beneath me, understanding finally that the family I'd so desperately wanted to belong to had seen me not as a daughter, but as a solution to their problems. The lavender perfume, the Sunday dinners, the gentle dears and warm embraces, all of it had been an elaborate performance designed to soften me up for this moment. My hands were shaking as I called David from the parking lot, the phone feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. His voice when he answered was cheerful, unsuspecting, and I realized he had no idea what his parents had tried to do. The conversation was brief and brutal. I could hear his world cracking through the phone line as I explained what the lawyer had discovered, what his parents had attempted to do to his wife. The silence that followed felt like the space between lightning and thunder, pregnant with the promise of destruction. The confrontation happened in their living room, the same space where I'd shared countless Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Margaret sat on the edge of her floral sofa, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Robert stood by the window, his back to us, shoulders rigid with defensive anger. David sat beside me, his face pale with disbelief and growing fury. "How could you?" The words came out as a whisper, but they carried the weight of all my shattered illusions. Margaret's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to explain about the business, about their desperation, about how they never meant to hurt me, but her words felt hollow now. Empty apologies from people who had been willing to destroy my financial future to save their own. Robert turned from the window, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "It was just temporary," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We would have paid it back. We were going to protect you. But we all knew that was a lie. The documents were permanent, binding, designed to transfer risk from them to me with no protections, no guarantees, no way back." I stood up slowly, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed flowing through my veins like warm honey. "You tried to trick me into signing away my future," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "You played on my love for this family, my desire to belong, to manipulate me into financial ruin. That's not protection. That's predation." The words hung in the air like a judgment, final and irreversible. Margaret sobbed quietly, and Robert's shoulders sagged in defeat. David reached for my hand, his grip tight and desperate, and I realized this moment was defining not just my relationship with his parents, but our marriage itself. We left that house together, David and I, walking away from the lavender and lies, toward an uncertain but honest future. The months that followed were difficult, filled with family therapy sessions and difficult conversations about trust and manipulation. David had to confront the reality that his parents were capable of cruelty disguised as care, and I had to learn that my worth wasn't determined by others' acceptance of me. But something beautiful emerged from that devastation. I discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, capable of protecting myself and my future family in ways I'd never been taught. The little voice that had whispered warnings in Margaret's dining room grew louder, more confident, more trustworthy. I learned to listen to my instincts instead of my desperate need to belong. Our first child was born 2 years later, a daughter with David's eyes, and what I hope will be my newfound wisdom. I look at her sometimes and promise silently that she will never need someone else's approval to know her worth. She will grow up understanding that love doesn't require sacrificing your future, that family shouldn't come with hidden costs, that trust must be earned through actions, not just words. The relationship with David's parents remains complicated, built now on clear boundaries and honest communication, rather than performance and manipulation. Margaret still makes her lavender-scented bread, but I no longer mistake the smell for love. Robert still sits in his leather chair, but I no longer need his approval to know I belong somewhere. I belong to myself first, to the family David and I are building together, to the truth that saved me from a future of financial ruin and emotional manipulation. Sometimes the greatest gift is discovering your own strength just in time to use it. The lawyer's business card sits in my wallet still, a small reminder that sometimes strangers care more about protecting you than the people who claim to love you most.